idea didn't suffer. But what I thought what I would do is talk about one subject that is dear to me, and that is the proliferation of IDW throughout the electrical industry. Getting the uptake by many more distributors and manufacturers. I kind of divided it into 4 parts. I wanted to look outside our industry. How did others use technology in solving business problems in service delivery? What were the ingredients that made it fly? And I picked examples that are well familiar to everybody, so we don't have to, we can be on the same page and kind of just walk through the mechanics there. We did a short survey of distributors and manufacturers, and those who replied, I'm very grateful. It is not a statistically valid survey. The sample wasn't big enough for that, but there's an awful lot of good information there, which will confirm what you already know, but may give you some slightly different perspective on a couple of things. So from that, I would like to zero in on what are the barriers and enablers to the adoption of e-commerce solutions in this industry. And finally, I'd like to say a few words about the role of standards. And the reason I want to do that is that it's been my experience that standards are somewhat misunderstood and the role in business. So I looked at three areas. These are well known to everybody. But just let's look at what happened with the airline industry. Some 30 years ago or so, they got deregulated. And the main carriers now have inefficient route structure, inefficient fleet structure, expensive labor contracts, and high marketing expenses. Not a good way to go into a competitive market. Not only that, but you don't have the ability to change overnight. You can't replace the aircraft park overnight, route structure, and so on. So they're muddling their way through this in many iterations, employee-owned companies, what have you. It's not easy. About 10, 12 years into the project, we see proliferation of internet. It's available, widely available. It's available to businesses and to consumers. And somebody gets this brilliant idea, why don't we offer them online reservations? Yeah, okay. People start looking at it, start using it a little bit. Then you get things like the Internet Travel Network, where you can now pick between flights and so on. And more and more people take to it. One nice day, what do the airlines do? The best available rates are on our website. And by the way, travel agents, if you wish to offer that service to your customers, you may do so. We recommend you charge for it because we're not going to pay commission. Okay? But what else had to happen for this to work? What had to happen was that the whole industry came on board. It would have been very difficult for a single or a couple of airlines to do this. So the critical thing here is there was a big pain because they were not making money. They were struggling from day to day. They still are. And there was an opportunity. There was a technologically based opportunity to solve the problem. But it still needed the buy-in of the industry. And it became the industry-wide solution. I don't think it was competition, as Tim Sanders was talking about this morning. I think it was bare necessity. Look at the banking industry. By about mid-'80s, they decided they were not into high finance. They were a service industry, no different than the restaurant or anybody else. And I wish they had stayed with that. But when you're in the service industry, what does it mean? You've got to develop service products, new offering, enhance customer service. You've got to improve productivity. Now, it matters. So what did it look like before they started to deploy technology? In customer service. There were a gazillion of branches, usually 3 or 4 in every corner. And you went there either at lunchtime or, hey boss, I'm going to work late tomorrow. I got to go to the bank. Or you went on Saturday, right? So they were busy at lunchtime. They were busy just before closing hours. And the rest of the day, they were catching up on the paperwork because you have to process the manual, deposit slips, withdrawal slips, and so on. So what did they do? They started building data centers. And at the time, I was selling motor control, and we did a lot of them. all of a sudden there were half a dozen being built, big ones around Toronto, for instance. And that happened across the United States as well. So the first thing they did was they introduced the bank card. So now you were no longer Mr. Jancik as a customer, you were customer number so-and-so. And by the way, this idea that you can overdraw your account and not worry about it, that's out the window. We have to set it. And by the way, right now it's 0. We went through some experience as customers. But what it enabled them to do was, now you brought in your card, they could process the transaction on the spot because they could punch it in. The next step was the ATM. Now you have banking 24/7. You can do the deposits, pay the bills, check your balances, and so on. At the same time, what did we see? Well, we saw that there were far fewer branches. They started closing them. They started to consolidate the regional centers with the business banking and so on. And basically began to rely more and more on ATMs, telephone banking, and eventually we got the internet banking. And what do we do today? We get the bills electronically, we pay them electronically, we do the stock trades electronically, and so on. Now, we still have branches, and there's still some retail banking being done, but they also change the mission of those branches. They sell mutual funds, life insurance, and whatever else, the products that they decided to offer. So, and you got some new products, ING Direct, you can only do this via the internet. Again, there was a need, there was a solution, and there was an industry-wide implementation of those solutions. Critical point here. And finally, look at healthcare. Everybody knows that the healthcare costs are escalating at an unsustainable rate, and people are starting to look at savings. Now, we have kind of a combination of public-private health insurance. I was at my optometrist the other day, and everybody's got a brand new big screen PC. The 3 optometrists, 2 nurses, receptionist, and I said, boy, you've got high tech. She looks at me, she says, well, I should have been born 10 years earlier. I hate this stuff, but we have to do it. So I'll come to why they have to do it. But we're converting the paper health records to electronic records. And also, the digital files from diagnostic imaging. What does it do? There's cost saving, there's better quality of healthcare because a lot of the times it happens, let's say you end up in a trauma unit and they don't have your medical history. They have to reconstruct. So, for insurance purposes, you have the health history. Any physician treating you, whether it's a specialist or a general practitioner, has the entire medical history. And finally, it also allows outsourcing of things like radiology. We used to think we could put the back office to India. Well, you could put the back office, engineering, software development, radiology, legal research, and whatever else you want. It changes the dynamic. But again, there is a pain, the escalating costs, there is a solution, and there is industry-wide adoption. In this case, some of mandating. So that's really what I wanted to get to. Since we're talking about the internet, I thought I would share a couple of slides with you. This is from something called Forrester Research. It's from consumer research. It's widely available in the public domain. I'll give you a link to it. But what it shows is that even at the time when we saw decline of non-internet and total sales during the recession, the internet sales actually went up. It indicates a trend. The second slide I wanted to show you, this was a little over a year ago at the Conference of Distributors and Manufacturers in Canada, where business-to-business consulting were asked to survey small and medium-sized contractors. And the big aha was this. 2/3 of electrical contractors access the web weekly to conduct stock checks, catalog searches, and resource buying decisions. And since that time, there's been almost an explosion of what's available on the internet from distributors. So what are some of the drivers of e-commerce development? This is my list, and you may have a different one, but without any order of priority. Changing buyer behavior, for sure. And some of it happens because of changing demographics. Not only in consumer sales, it happens in industrial sales as well. Customer service opportunities. You can offer things you weren't able to offer before. I'll give an example. Let's say you're a distributor and you're managing a project, and you've got a major supplier who's building switchgear controls or whatever else. Wouldn't it be nice if you could log in and see where in the production cycle the thing is? Instead of somebody tells you on the day the delivery was due, oh, what I need another 3 weeks. Man, you're the one who has to explain it to the contractor. Improvements to operations. Kind of things that are being discussed here. When Ram Schlater was talking about only having 1.5 people dealing with the price discrepancies, eliminated the pain. Now, I prefer you could have done this for the IDW, but looking at the operations and driving out costs. Pressure on margins, that's probably going to be with us for a while. And nobody operates in a vacuum. There is competition out there. So what were the questions that we wanted to ask the distributors, and why did we ask those questions? The first one was we wanted to know the size of the business. Wanted to see if it matters in some of these decisions. Then we wanted to know what is happening with internet sales. Is it really an important issue to them, and how much business flows through there? Same thing with EDI transactions with distributor customers and with their suppliers. And what is being done and what are some of the issues there? Then, this came out of, in my past life, I spent 6 years running the industry association in Canada, and talking to members. This is outside of the study. One CEO of a major distributor said to me, in my ideal world, I would get rid of the books, and people wouldn't be going to manufacturers' websites. The stuff would be on my computer. So we wanted to know to what degree people are able to use their own IT systems when they're estimating order and so on. Finally, there was an open-ended question: what non-monetary things can suppliers do for distributors? So here's what we found. In our sample, we had this distribution of electrical wholesalers. In terms of representation of the market, I think in Canada we probably capture about half the markets only because it's so concentrated. That would not be the case in the U.S., but we got some very good information from the U.S. distributors. So internet sales, people reported between 0 and 10%, and that kind of rings true. In the 2010 Rexel annual report, and you can see it on the website, they reported 1.1 billion euro out of a global turnover of 4 billion euro. Those who do, everybody can do it by part number. About 2/3 can do it by description, product description, and 12% of our sample reported that they also have some configurators on their website. As far as the importance, the question was unimportant, somewhat important, important, or very important. So the calculated number was about 57%. EDI transactions. It seems that in sales to transactions with customers, about 12% of those transactions are EDI, and it's almost entirely customer driven. I said almost, you'll see why in a minute. Between suppliers and distributors, again, it's a calculated figure. If somebody said more than 30%, I said 50. But the issue is not whether it's 25, 35, or 40%. The issue is it's a hybrid system. Nobody is doing electronic transactions, manual transactions. They kind of do both. And finally, about 57% of the time, people are able to rely, at least on our sample, on their company IT system to access the information. So, what stands in the way of internet sales? Somebody said nothing, so I didn't put it up there. But if you look at this list, what do you see? The first three items, and they're representative, speak directly to IDW. Okay? Speak directly to IDW. If you had it, it answers the prayers. The last one is also interesting. Customers use website extensively by phoning the orders. Well, in consumer research, they find that a lot of the times the decision is made by the people who shop at retail. In this case, and the conclusion that the respondent came to was that therefore internet is not that important. And I said, well, it's working for you. I don't know how many decisions are made because people have established relationships with distributors, but for sure it's a great deal of convenience for those customers. The other question was, what stands in the way of EDI with customers? Standardization, I never appreciated it, but apparently you have to, the last comment talks about matching issues, that even if the forms are the same, the way people present the information is not identical, and then there's some work associated with that. Cost seems to be an issue. Only large corporations will use EDI. Well, that may not be true, but they certainly are more likely to require it. The next item is interesting because there is a distributor who seems to promote it and has about double the rate of the industry in the EDI transactions with customers. This was more interesting to me. What stands in the way of EDI with suppliers? Supplier capabilities and willingness to implement EDI. You will see when we come to the manufacturers, they have a slightly different perspective. Availability of UPC codes on all products. Hello, IDW. You can't have an item without a product code. Supplier needs to be large enough to make it worthwhile. That's a cost issue. Would like suppliers to pay half the cost of the setup. The EDI transaction supplier gets the biggest saving. I don't know who gets the biggest saving, but what I want to know is, do I save enough? So anyway, but it seems to be an issue. And again, accurate data. It's a database issue. And this was also interesting. I know the company well, and they said, you can read it, they spend a lot of resources. They seem to be very innovative, which I say, well, it's working for them, they're innovative, but they're spending money where they could get the stuff from IDW. That's why we're doing this IDW and risk attribute data. What are some of the non-monetary things suppliers could provide? Now, this one is interesting because I know it's now a synchronized database, not data warehousing, but they don't know that. This came from this is a comment from the president of an independent owner of a company. The first, provide PDFs of all products that we can use them on our e-commerce site for customers to view. Better availability of images, descriptions, and attributes. Advice when there are price discrepancies. Supply all price files in Excel that include UPC codes. All of IDW issues. Every single one of them. Make all products barcoded is not, but it still seems to be an issue. And then the usual stuff, confirmation was accurate lead times, ship when promised, use of order placement, and there were others. But what my takeaway, and this was a bit of an eye-opener for me, is that when you get the responses, it all seems to be pointing, or a good deal of it seems to be pointing towards the need for IDW. So what do we want to know from manufacturers? First, do they sell to wholesalers or both wholesalers and retailers? And the reason for that is obvious. If you sell to retailers, then you have to provide the data in the required fashion. It's not an option. 57% of our respondents sell exclusively to electrical wholesalers, 43% sell to both. We wanted to know the manufacturer's perspective on the EDI sales to distributors. In what format do they provide information to distributors? And then we have specific questions about IDW. Do they have data in there? Are they familiar with the attribute schema? Are they planning to populate it for the next 3 to 6 months? That was the question. So here's what we came back with. About 1/3 of the manufacturers said they do more than 30% via EDI. That number could be a lot higher, 50 to 60%. 40% of the manufacturers reported between 20 and 30% of transactions. And in total, 85% of them do some EDI. At a minimum, they do the purchase order and the invoice. 65% use order confirmation. 60% use advanced shipping notice. And again, I never appreciated the importance of it until I visited a member, a large distributor. In fact, number one in his market. He's got very advanced systems. He's very technology savvy and he's got fabulous operations there. And he says, I can't get the advanced shipping notice as wide as you want them because his system, his warehouse management system, then allocates shelf space. The information goes into his IT system so people know when they can promise delivery and so on. If it doesn't get it, then that process begins when the goods arrive. And 43% use additional forms, in some cases fairly extensive set of additional forms. So what stands in the way of EDI with distributors? And it seems to be centering around the resources at the distributor end. Know-how of EDI and resources dedicated to information system support, distributor readiness, systems capability, and so on. The next one is interesting. Comfort level with fax transmission. One respondent made an interesting comment. Even when we're dealing with a national distributor, when we're dealing with the branches, they prefer fax or phone, but they may not even be able to do the EDI in some cases. A desire to work together to improve accuracy. Well, one of the benefits of Proof Database is that you can eliminate a lot of tasks in your internal processes. Again, but that's IDW issue. Data accuracy. Industry standard would make the whole concept much more attractive. I think, again, it refers to how the information is provided. What would prompt you to populate IDW? Now, these responses are primarily from the Canadian distributors, the manufacturers, sorry. The U.S. manufacturers in our sample, actually all of them do it. What is interesting sometimes is that the same company operates differently on the Canadian side than it would in the U.S. I'm not quite sure I understand that, but it happens. But here's what I get. is understanding the value proposition. And I can tell you, again, from my past life, I talked to a CEO of a major corporation. Again, the company in the U.S. is working on it. The company in Canada was working on it. But his question still was, what is the value proposition? It wasn't clear to him. Not that there was no answer to it, but it wasn't clear to him. You can guess how big a priority it was as a result of that. Need to meet customers' requirements. Greater acceptance from our customers. And one specific comment, to begin populating the IDW, we would need to see a request from at least 2 of our distributor partners. And finally, the last one bothered me because it came from a CEO and an owner of a medium-sized company who put in SAP. In other words, he's willing to make an investment in technology. And so my conclusion from that is that they haven't seen yet the demand from the distributors. I think they may see it in the near future, but they haven't yet. Okay. Here is how they provide information to distributors. 86% rely on the catalog to provide product information to distributors. 93% do Excel files with pricing. So even if they're in IDW, they still do Excel files with pricing to the distributor. Now, you see 2 columns there, and the reason is that on the left you've got the numbers from Canada, on the right the sample we have from the U.S. they're 100% good. I'll go through that in a minute. So IDW, 38% of our respondents in Canada have some data in IDW. The sample we have from the U.S., all of them do. Familiarity with the attribute schema, 57%. Data, committed to providing data within 6 months, 21% said they would. 19% of them provide data to trade services, and 69% look at the website as a source of information for the distributors. What you don't see there is, we asked them more questions. We wanted to know, can you estimate what percentage of your distributors get data from IDW, even if it's not on your product? And what percentage of them get data from trade services? In the Canadian sample, the answer was 0 to 20% of both, which tells me they haven't got a clue. And the reason they don't, it hadn't yet been a conversation between the manufacturers and the distributors. So they were guessing. In the U.S., it was more interesting. The calculated figure was 55% of them get data, their distributor partners get data from trade services, and between 20 and 40% get them from IDW. Now, forget about trade services, but if 20 to 40% get it from IDW, that leaves 60 to 80% that don't. And that to me is the challenge. And when I see the responses that we get to the questions, many of them point to the need for clean database, the kind of database that IDW provides, it seems to me that there is now a momentum building for broadly based adoption. So what are some of the enablers of e-commerce? Certainly it helps if you have a modern ERP system. Reliable communications, such as IDX, it certainly helps. Consensus on the business case. Now, what I mean by consensus, there is an identified pain which affects a large number of manufacturers and distributors. There is an available solution, people agree that it's a solution, and there is a commitment to the adoption of that solution, meaning in this case, manufacturers will commit to populate the database, and distributors will commit to using it. That to me is a consensus. Once you have that consensus, the rest is not that difficult, because you can execute on a project management schedule. Because a lot of it is done by the manufacturer or by the distributor. It's important, once people get going, that they have access to qualified resources and help. And finally, consequences. Look, if you're a supplier and I'm a distributor and I've calculated it's costing me $100,000 a year because I'm not getting accurate information, well, please give me the data or give me the 100 grand. Okay? That's the concept. Vice versa.
Or both.
Yeah.
Or both.
I'm not going to. But if I'm a manufacturer and I provide data to the IDW and somebody says, you know what, I really prefer an Excel spreadsheet. Well, you can prefer it, but you know what, I spent a lot of money putting the data in the IDW and I'd like you to use it. If you like me to, I'll do it for you, but it's costing me money, so I want to get paid. That's what I mean by consequences. So let's briefly look at the role of the standards. And once there was a survey that I was part of, Standards Council of Canada is the committee and approval of ANSI. And they wanted to know how many people in the industry understand what the national standard system is. And I spent about an hour and a half on the phone with the gentleman that was doing the survey. He was on the board of Standards Council. And finally, turned out even majority of the members on the board of Standards Council didn't have a clue what was meant by national standard system. So I'm not going to talk about the national standard system, but that's when I got the idea that people don't always understand the role of standards. So if you look at the electrical industry, what do we have? We have safety standards. Most of them are developed by industry experts. There are other in the matrix of those committees, but most of it is done by industry experts. We have product standards, which are mostly owned by the industry. We have other standards that we use frequently, both the assurance, environmental compliance, energy efficiency. The last one we don't own, and it caused me a lot of grief, because we have to advocate for members. Then we have the United Nations Standard Product and Services Code, the item number, and we have the IDW standard, previous attribute schema. The role of standards is necessary for the good function of industry, any industry. What is the benefit to manufacturers if there's a standardized way of providing information? We only have to do it once. Okay. Otherwise, even in this market in the U.S., you've got 5 major national distributors, 2 major buying groups. That's a potential for 4 or 5 different systems, potentially, in the long term. They need to be developed and owned by the industry. I spent more time dealing with things where industry vacated their spot and cost others get into it and cost free for the industry. You can design the standards that best serve the industry. That applies to any standard that the industry uses. And in that sense, IDW is an extension. And it provides a standard for format and content of information furnished by suppliers to distributors and assures accuracy and synchronization of that information. And that assures is probably the single biggest value proposition because you can rely upon it. And then it also provides a platform for application development. You want a catalog for a motor company or something, you can do it. You give it to somebody, here's what I want, and here's the data. So finally, when we're talking about the use of technology in the delivery of customer service, these are business decisions. There are a lot of technological issues, but it's a business decision. There's a business decision you make to enhance customer service, to reduce operating costs, and to create a competitive price. That's the source of the return on investment. If you want an industry-wide solution, then there's got to be a broadly based buy-in, there's got to be a project management approach, and there's got to be an ongoing maintenance and support. It's not a one-time deal. That's my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. If there are some questions, I'd be happy to attempt to answer them.